Are you tired of feeling confident and full of energy? Do you crave the thrill of watching the numbers on the scale go up and up? Join us on Return to Eden for part 1 of our series on weight loss, stigmas, tools, and how-tos. My name is Kendra Hann, fitness and nutrition specialist, and I'm here in studio with Jamie Woodle, integrative nutrition health coach and master of health science education. Times sure have changed in America. Yeah. We have a much larger population in more ways than one, but is that really a big deal?
Yeah, unfortunately it is. And what comes to mind is there is a photo that's been going around social media that I think of where it was a bunch of beachgoers in the 70s. And when you look at it, not a single person was overweight. But if you were to see a similar picture now, it'd be a much different story.
Yeah.
And it really is concerning, not just from a vanity standpoint, but more so from a heartbreaking and painful standpoint, and the fact that there are consequences that come along now with us as a population being overweight. Not just on a personal level, but also when it comes to the amount of money that our country spends on healthcare. So in America, they spend over $173 billion just on obesity-related healthcare.
Oh my gosh.
And the danger comes from the fact that when we have an excess of fat tissue, it becomes very inflammatory. And as we've talked about on other shows, inflammation leads to a host of other chronic diseases.
Like diabetes and heart disease, right?
Yeah, and even cancer and eventually death, unfortunately.
So why do you think we as a population have been steadily getting heavier?
I think when you look at our society, it's really set up against us living our most healthy life. And there are so many factors that contribute to our size or weight gain in general.
Yeah, not the least of which is the extremely high cost of choosing the healthier option a lot of the time. I mean, just last weekend, my children and I were at the gas station and I noticed it was $1 for this massive soft drink where the bottled water that we were going for was almost twice that price.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate the way it's set up. Or even in a restaurant, sometimes the salads are way more expensive than some of the other unhealthier dishes. So there are a lot of factors that really play into our inclination for weight gain. Genetics for a long, long time. When I began going to college, they talked about genetics playing a huge factor. And I remember them saying that if both of your parents are obese, you have an 80% chance of also being obese. And at the time, they were using that to talk about genetics. But I can't help but wonder if it's correlation and not causation, because when you have 2 obese parents and maybe they are not making the best lifestyle choices, well, then as you grow up, that's the norm for you as well. My mother fought her weight forever, and I remember her snacking on things that I eventually took to. I remember her snacking on saltine crackers and butter, sit down with chips and sour cream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same in my household. And actually, I can't think of a single adult woman in my childhood that did not regularly struggle with yo-yo dieting and have body image issues.
Another huge issue that we have currently in our society is an abundance of hormonal imbalances, and not just like testosterone and estrogen and things like that, but there's also a lot of insulin resistance. I mean, there are millions of people out there who probably have insulin resistance and aren't even aware of it because we're not made aware until it's gone so far that they have type 2 diabetes. There's also thyroid issues. There are many people who have thyroid issues and don't even know it. And also leptin.
That's really interesting. I didn't get too far into leptin, but can you explain that a little more? That's not something I've really heard a lot of.
No, it really doesn't get a lot of attention, but leptin is a hormone that is made when you're eating a meal, and it's the satiety hormone.
Okay.
So it tells your body, okay, we've had enough food, we're satisfied, but you can actually develop leptin resistance, and then you start eating too much because that signal is too slow to be received to know that, oh my goodness, I'm full, I don't need any more food.
Well, and that's why in those blue zones, they say things like eat until you're 80% full and then stop. So not waiting for that signal, eating slower, I'm sure those would all be super beneficial for anyone with leptin resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And even gut health. We talk a lot about gut health on this show.
That's true.
But for good reason. There was a study, and this was done way back, I believe, before 2010, where they took lab mice, the sterile kind that don't have a microbiome, and they took feces from obese mice and transplanted it into these sterile mice. And they didn't make any other changes. They had the same amount of food, water, everything. But these lab mice began to gain weight, and they eventually became obese. So when they studied the microbiome to find out why on earth are these mice also becoming obese, they found that in the microbiome, there were things that were causing simple sugars to be absorbed too quickly. They were too energy efficient.
Other contributing factors to weight gain could be nutritional deficiencies like a D3 deficiency or a magnesium deficiency. And those things are incredibly common in our society where our foods tend to be less nutrient dense.
Yes, absolutely. Vitamin D3 is arguably one of the most important nutrients that we need to have. And I think that might be why we were created, to produce it on our own when exposed to sunlight.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we work inside a lot. We're not outside as much as we used to be. But every cell in our body has D3 receptors. We have to have enough D3 in order for our cells to function properly. And so many people are deficient and don't even know it. And magnesium is another one. It's responsible for over 300 physiological functions in the body. But we're not getting enough. Our soil is depleted. Our leafy greens aren't quite as rich in minerals as they used to be 50 or 100 years ago.
Well, the farming practices contribute to that lack of nutritional density. So even if you are trying to make the right choices, you're seeking those vegetables and eating the rainbow, a lot of the time you're not getting the same nutritional benefit that you would have gotten.
There's another factor that contributes to our weight gain, and that's inflammation. And that's something we don't talk about a lot in regards to weight gain or the difficulty in losing weight. So many things cause inflammation. It can be nutritional deficiencies. It can be poor gut health, heavy metals, even dormant viruses that we end up fighting for ages and ages, like the Epstein-Barr virus. And those cause this low level of inflammation. Also, food sensitivities.
And stress.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know anybody who isn't existing at almost peak stress levels in America today? We have these unrealistic expectations of our time. And in adhering to those, we end up, like you said, not going outside, choosing the most convenient and quick options rather than something that's going to provide us with the fuel that our body really needs. And honestly, I can't remember a single time in health class having one of my teachers discuss nutritional deficiencies or inflammation.
Yeah, I had no idea. When I began my health journey, my health coach recommended to me that I get some lab work done to see if I was reacting to any foods that I was consuming. It came back that my blood test showed I reacted to over 26 foods. And so when I removed those foods, about 3 weeks later, I had lost a bunch of weight because inflammation causes you to hold on to weight. I'd lost a bunch of weight. I was sleeping through the night. I felt so much better. So there are so many things that are causing this chronic low-grade inflammation in our bodies that we're not even aware of.
In addition to those factors, it's important to note the role that mental health plays in our weight gain and our holding on to those adipose cells.
Absolutely.
So I did some research, and it turns out that people who have mental health issues are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop obesity and obesity-related illnesses. And people who have developed obesity are 25% more likely to develop mood and anxiety disorders.
Wow. I'm really not surprised at the correlations, because when you think about depression, you are struggling to feel good.
Yeah.
And food sometimes makes you feel good. And I relate to that because I have ADHD and I'm a bit of a dopamine chaser.
Yeah.
And I do struggle with getting too much joy out of food. And I really have to not be impulsive and have self-control in that area. But we do sometimes comfort ourselves with food. Also, depression is linked to poor gut microbiome. So there's certainly some type of connection there altogether where one's making the other worse and vice versa.
And it's just this cycle that's so difficult to get out of in a society that really doesn't support the breaking of that cycle.
Absolutely.
And then because of struggling with mental health issues, we develop these really unhealthy relationships with food. And I'm not immune to that myself. I mean, a lot of times when the world feels out of control, one thing that we can control is what we're consuming, what we're putting into our bodies. So we tend to look at food as a treat or a reward for accomplishing a task, or we relegate a food to being good or bad, not based on nutritional density, but rather on some arbitrary emotional response that we've had to that food in the past.
Yeah, sometimes it's our upbringing too. Like, for example, I struggle with ice cream because growing up, I struggled with my weight. And one poor habit that we had growing up is we frequently ate decently sized bowls of ice cream after dinner. And I was participating in that. And I remember my father looked at me and he said, "Fat, fat, fat, the boys aren't going to look at you." And this happened on multiple occasions. And so now, even as a grown-up, and I'm happily married, and I still enjoy some dairy-free ice cream once in a while, and I still hear those words in my head. And so sometimes it is our mental health. Sometimes it's our upbringing or people in our life that have put those thoughts in our head.
Even if it's not those things being said directly to you, but witnessing people in your life that you respect who are saying those things to themselves. And as a mother, that's something that I've become uniquely aware of. I did the same thing that my mother's always did, which is, you pinch in the mirror, or you complain about how a shirt fits, or your pants are a little too tight. But when you have a daughter and you start to see her mimicking those behaviors, it really hits you how damaging those things can be, because I would never, ever want my daughter or my sons to speak to themselves about their bodies the way that I learned to do that, by looking at my examples.
Yeah, which means we really need to be role models as parents. And I have tried to be extra careful when I speak to my children, or when I'm around my children, that I'm not beating myself up and complaining about the extra inch here or the roll there. I try not to do that too much, because then they start looking at themselves and finding those flaws.
And in a lot of ways, like we've said several times, it feels almost like society is setting us up for these kinds of situations in terms of developing obesity. For instance, there's an extremely popular fast food chain that actually hired scientists, food scientists, to use a combination of fats, sugars, and salts to make their food more addictive. So
Absolutely.
You're so inclined to seek that dopamine hit or that collection of flavors that you don't even pay attention to your body's natural full or hungry signals. You just eat for the pleasure of doing it.
Absolutely. And that really can play into food addictions. How much is that a factor in contributing to people developing food addictions?
Absolutely. So it's no wonder that a lot of people have just thrown up their hands and started to participate in things like the body positivity movement or health at every size,
Absolutely. So let's talk about those for a little bit. These are gaining a lot of momentum, especially with social media, when you have health at every size, body positivity, things like that. Well, the body positivity movement, they're also big into accepting yourself at every size and whatever health level. But theirs is more of a desire to go against the societal norm. And that makes me think of the 1990s, when you would see a lot of media about these very, very thin, almost anorexic looking celebrities. And I remember thinking, even when I was quite thin, that I wasn't thin enough, because all of the people you would see on the screen were excruciatingly thin. And that can become a societal norm. And so this movement is about loving your body and accepting it, no matter what society tells us we should be looking like.
Where does the problem come in?
Well, the problem is that this movement especially overemphasizes body image to the other extreme, almost cult-like, and they glorify obesity. And that can be a problem in and of itself, because then it also encourages them to ignore their doctor's concerns. In fact, they're so cult-like that there have been several reports of people within the movement who perhaps had a health scare, or for whatever reason decided they wanted to lose weight to become healthy. And they were bullied and even cut off and ostracized from the movement because they were perceived as not accepting their body the way it is because they wanted to lose weight to get healthy. And another unfortunate thing that's being discovered now is several of the body positivity movement activists have passed away at a young age due to obesity-related complications.
So if the body positivity movement is encouraging a glorification of obesity, would that not also mean that it's glorifying the idea of an early death? And what a tool for the enemy to use, disguising self-harm and self-hate as this beautiful movement of self-love. And what an incredibly manipulative way to separate us from the calling that God's placed on our lives.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point because Satan is not wasting a single opportunity to exploit our weaknesses and use it against us to make us unhappy and torture us and ultimately take us away from what God has for us. So, Kendra, I think what we really need is a movement to take off that does encourage people to respect everyone, no matter what size they are, and to indeed get rid of weight stigmas, while also encouraging a focus on healthy eating and healing.
I totally agree. You can definitely recognize that there are things in your life that you would like to change, either about your dietary choices, your weight, or the environment that you live in, without the need to hate yourself or vilify others and yourself for those choices.
Absolutely.
Another thing I wanted to talk about today are these injectable weight loss drugs. I've seen tons of ads for them online. One thing that's concerning to me when we were doing this research is I actually went on several websites that within just a few minutes and a short survey were ready to send me these injectable weight loss drugs in the mail with no prescription, no doctor's appointment, no consultation at all. You put in information and they send you the medication.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a class of drugs out that are GLP-1 stimulators, semaglutides, liraglutides, and our body naturally makes this hormone GLP-1, but this artificially stimulates an overproduction of it. And it was originally made for diabetics to help slow the digestion of food, to slow the uptake of carbohydrates, and therefore the spiking of the blood sugar. And it was ultimately made in a hope to reduce the complications associated with out-of-control diabetes. Well, they soon found that because it slows the emptying of the stomach and it reduces appetite, that several people were losing weight. And maybe you don't have to be a diabetic to get this drug now, and it became very popular.
Yeah, one thing I will note is in the surveys that I was doing as part of our research for this, it does specifically ask if you have ever been diagnosed with an eating disorder or a mental health issue, such as depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations. The part of it that worried me, though, is you can go in and mark yes, that those things have been a diagnosis that you've received. And then it'll say, oh, sorry, you don't qualify. Please go to your doctor. But if you click the back button, don't even open a new window or sign up for a new profile. Just click the back button, unclick those things, and then move forward. Oh, just kidding. You can get these medications with no doctor consultations at all. It feels very dangerous to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. And these things, they're expensive. When you do get them with doctor, without, however you get them, they're expensive. And ultimately, we're finding out they have some pretty horrible side effects. So some of the common ones are headache, nausea, diarrhea, constipation. You can also have issues with your kidneys or your gallbladder. But some of the more serious ones are pancreatitis, which if you've never had it before, it is absolutely awful. It's very painful and miserable. And they're also finding that it can contribute to the development of thyroid tumors. Another thing that really needs to be noted is that these were designed for long-term use. These were not designed to take for 6 months and to lose some weight. What happens, they're finding now statistically, is that the large majority of the people, when they stop taking them, they gain all the weight back, some even more. And so they're designed originally to be used for diabetics, to be used continuously to help prevent them from developing the complications.
So these otherwise healthy individuals are choosing to get on these medications without doctor's orders, without a real medical need to do so, and are actually creating medical needs.
I don't believe that these type of injectable drugs that people are using for the purpose of weight loss, they're not for everybody. They're really not. Now, I could see maybe a genuine contemplation of perhaps I should take this if you are, looking at possibly death coming upon you. You are 600 pounds, almost immobile or are immobile, and you're looking at, will this extend my future? But if you're 20, 30 pounds overweight and otherwise healthy, do you really want to take the risk of developing thyroid tumors or constant headaches, nausea? I've spoken to a lot of people who have taken them and had horrible side effects and had to get off of it and, of course, gain the weight back.
If you're struggling with your weight and want to know the healthiest and most effective ways to break that cycle, join us next time on Return to Eden when we talk about that and how all calories aren't created equal. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you have a blessed day.